This is a preview of Ash on the Road, The Weight of True Things, Book 1. Written by Alexander Anderson. If you enjoy this preview and would like to read or listen to the full book, you can find the ebook and full audiobook details below. Chapter 1. The road had gone quiet in the way that meant run or die. Kalen stopped mid-stride, grain sack heavy against his shoulder, and listened to the winter silence press down like a held breath. No crow call. No wind scraping through the scrub. Not even the distant grind of a cart axle from the hamlet behind him, though he'd passed 3 wagons not an hour past. Just his own breathing and the faint creak of frozen leather where his sword belt pulled against his hip. The afternoon light slanted wrong, too pale for the hour, and the air tasted like iron left in wet stone. He shifted the oil jug against his spine so it wouldn't crack his ribs if he had to move fast. The salt bundle rode hard at his hip, waxed tight against moisture. Cloth roll, grain sack, cooking oil, all the winter supplies his family needed, and all of it too heavy to run with if whatever had killed the sound came for him. His fingers found the sword hilt. The leather was cold enough to burn. Something clicked in the left-hand ditch. Kalen turned toward the sound, boots finding the crown of the frozen road, shoulders squaring so the ditch stayed beside him instead of beneath him. Smart opponents went for footing first. Made a man stumble, made him easy. The scrub along the ditch line parted. No wrestle, no snap of winter-dead branches. The brush just opened, as if the sticks had decided to let something through. A pale shape rose from the ditch like a puppet hauled up by strings. Then another. Then 3 more, spreading in a loose arc that cut off the road ahead and hemmed him against the ditch stones to his right. Shattered Souls. The name settled in Kalen's gut like swallowed stone. He'd heard the warnings since childhood, spoken at hearth fires and in training yards, always in low voices, always with the understanding that you hoped never to test the truth of them. Creatures from a broken place, drawn to boundaries, to thresholds, to anywhere the world had worn thin. He'd never thought to see them this far from the deep woods. He'd never thought to see them at all. They were wrong in the way that made his eyes want to slide away. Narrow-limbed and too tall, wrapped in travel cloth that hung like it belonged to corpses. Their hands stretched too long, fingers ending in black, hooked nails that caught the dim light and gave back nothing. When they moved, their joints bent in directions joints shouldn't bend. Knees bowed inward, elbows angled backward, each motion accompanied by a wet clicking sound like bone grinding on bone. No screaming, no frenzy. They spread with purpose. The lead shattered soul drifted left, not rushing but angling Kalen toward the ditch stones where footing would betray him. The pair on the right climbed the shallow bank in perfect coordination, feet finding purchase on ice-slicked dirt where a man would slip. The ones behind held position, cutting off retreat. They were hurting him. Kalen's throat went tight. The training yard warnings had been clear. Shattered souls hunted in packs. They tested. They learned. And they didn't stop until everything that lived had stopped living. He let the grain sack slide from his shoulder. The sack hit frozen dirt with a heavy thump, puffing flower-scented dust into the iron-tasting air. Kalen shrugged the cloth roll free with one sharp twist, let it fall, then unhooked the salt bundle and tossed it behind him without looking. Wax clacked against stone. His right arm came free. Steel whispered as he drew. The sound cut through the unnatural quiet like a promise. Kalen backed 1 step, keeping the road's crown under his boots and the ditch where he could see it. If they wanted him off solid ground, they'd have to come through him first. The first shattered soul lunged. It came low, faster than something with backward knees should move, black nails reaching for his ankle. Kalen didn't retreat. He pivoted on the ball of his left foot and brought his blade down in a short, descending cut that severed the creature's wrist. The hand separated with the wet crack of breaking green wood. It hit the frozen road, still grasping, fingers curling and uncurling as if trying to remember what they were supposed to hold. Dark blood fountained from the stump, spattering across ice and stone in thick ropes that steamed in the cold air. The smell struck him like a fist to the face. Sour iron, yes, but underneath it, something worse. Spoiled meat. Rot that had been walking around pretending it wasn't dead yet. The shattered soul didn't scream. It tried to rise anyway, wrong elbow grinding as it pushed up with its remaining hand, black blood pumping with each motion. Kalen stepped in and drove his point beneath its ribs, straight and deep, the way his father had drilled into him through 10,000 repetitions. No flourish, no wasted motion, just the efficient death of a threat. The blade punched through something that resisted like thick leather, then slid easier, and when he twisted the steel, he felt things inside the creature tear. It sagged, bones seeming to dissolve, and folded into the road like wet rope. Blood pooled beneath it, spreading in a dark mirror that reflected nothing. The two on the right came together, one high, one low, trying to split his attention, force him to choose which to block and which to take. The high one's nails reached for his throat. The low one feinted toward his shin. Kalen's body moved before his mind finished the thought. He slid his lead foot back half a step, clearing the rut that would have caught his heel, then snapped his blade across in a rising cut that met the high attacker's forearm. Edge bit deep. The arm separated at the elbow with a sound like snapping kindling, and the severed piece tumbled through the air, fingers still hooked like claws before hitting the ground and twitching. The shattered soul's clicking changed pitch. Confusion, maybe, or the sound its joints made when they lost connection to the limb that had guided them. It stared at the stump where its arm had been, dark blood running down its side, then looked at Kalen as if he'd broken some rule it hadn't known existed. Kalen didn't give it time to learn. His blade was already driving forward in a thrust that found the low attacker's throat as it surged up from its feint. The point slid between jaw and collarbone, punched through meat and windpipe, and erupted from the back of the creature's neck, trailing gore. He yanked the blade free, and the shattered soul folded around the wound, head lolling at an angle that made the neck look boneless. It tried to make the clicking sound, but only managed a wet gurgle before it toppled sideways into the ditch stones. 3 down. 2 to go. Kalen's breath came harder now, steaming in the cold air. His pulse hammered in his ears. The remaining shattered souls stood motionless, watching him with eyes that reflected light like an animal's, but held something worse than animal hunger. They were learning. The one ahead, the largest, the one that had been guiding the others, clicked once. A sound like a signal. Then it moved. Not a rush, not a lunge. It glided forward, knees bending wrong and then straightening in a movement so smooth it barely seemed to touch the ground. Its shoulders rolled, joints unhinging, and both arms came up with nails spread wide like a net meant to catch and tear. Kalen set his stance, weight balanced, sword angled to meet the attack. The shattered soul came faster than the others had, faster than something dead should move. Its nails slashed toward his face in a raking arc meant to blind, and Kalen leaned back just enough to let them pass, wind from the strike cold against his cheek. He countered with a rising cut aimed at the extended arms, but the creature twisted. Its spine bent in a way that made his stomach clench, vertebrae popping audibly, and his blade met only air. It was inside his guard before he could reset. Too close. Too fast. Black nails reached for his eyes. Kalen dropped his shoulder, turned his head, and took the raking strike across his temple instead of through his face. The hooked nails dug furrows through skin and scraped bone. Pain flared white-hot, blinding, and blood sheeted down the side of his face in a hot rush that filled his ear and soaked his collar. But he'd bought himself the space to bring his blade up in a pommel strike that caught the creature under its jaw. Bone cracked like river ice breaking. The shattered soul's head snapped back, clicking frantically, and Kalen followed with a thrust that punched through its sternum and out its back. He twisted the blade, felt ribs part like wet sticks, felt the steel grate against spine. Then he yanked free, and the creature's torso opened, spilling things that looked like organs but moved wrong, pulsing and collapsing as they hit the frozen ground. The creature dropped. Silence returned. Kalen stood in the center of the road, breathing hard, blood running down his neck to soak his collar. His sword dripped dark, spoiled blood onto ice that steamed faintly where the warmth touched it. 4 bodies lay twisted in positions that made them look like they'd been broken and scattered rather than killed. But there had been 5. Kalen's head snapped toward the ditch on his right. Empty. The last shattered soul. Gone. He turned a slow circle, sword up, scanning the scrub line and the low ridge beyond. Nothing moved. The silence had weight again, pressing down, and under it he heard something that made his blood go cold. More clicking. Distant but growing closer. Not 1 or 2, but a chorus. 10, 20, maybe more, echoing across the winter fields like an oncoming tide. Kalen looked at the supplies scattered across the road. The grain his family needed for the next month. The oil, the salt, all of it too heavy to carry while running, and running was the only thing that made sense now. His home was 2 miles up the hill road. His family was there, and whatever was coming, it wasn't going to stop at him. He sheathed his sword, wiped blood from his eyes with his sleeve, and ran. Behind him, the clicking multiplied into a sound like teeth on bone, and the empty road he'd traveled filled with pale shapes cresting the low ridge. They weren't hunting him anymore. They were hunting toward his home. Chapter 2. The ditch line. 2, 3, 4. Kalen drove the count between his teeth and into his legs, letting it pace him the way his father had taught him. 4 beats to breathe, 4 beats to find the next solid patch of road, 4 beats before checking behind. The hill road climbed ahead of him, frozen ruts angling upward through winter-stripped scrub. His boots hammered the ground in rhythm with his pulse, and blood from the temple wound ran hot down his neck despite the cold. Behind him, the clicking grew louder. He didn't turn to look. Looking cost breath, and breath was the only thing keeping his legs moving. The sound told him everything he needed to know anyway. Not 5 shattered souls anymore. Not 10. Dozens. Maybe more. A tide of wrong-jointed bodies flowing up from the lowlands, like floodwater finding a channel. And the channel led straight to his home. His lungs burned. The cut across his temple throbbed with each heartbeat, and the blood kept coming, warm and slick, soaking his collar and running under his shirt to stick against his ribs. He wanted to stop, press his hand to the wound, assess the damage. But stopping meant dying, and dying meant his family faced what was coming without warning. So he ran. The oil jug was gone. The salt bundle, the grain, the cloth roll, all of it abandoned on the road where he'd dropped it to fight. His sword slapped his hip with each stride, the only supply that mattered now. The road steepened. Kalen leaned into the slope, driving his knees up, forcing his boots to find purchase on ice-slicked stone. His thighs screamed. His breath came in gasps that tasted like blood and iron. Behind him, the clicking changed pitch. Higher now. Closer. They were gaining. 4 beats. Count. 4 beats. Breathe. The scrub line to his right rustled. Kalen's head snapped toward the sound, just as a pale shape launched itself from the ditch. He twisted mid-stride, barely keeping his footing, and the shattered soul's nails raked across his shoulder instead of his throat. Cloth tore, skin opened, pain flared hot and immediate. He didn't stop running. The creature hit the road behind him with a wet slap and immediately scrambled to follow, joints clicking as it found its feet. Kalen could hear it. Close. Too close. The sound of its nails scraping frozen dirt as it surged after him. He drew his sword without breaking stride. The shattered soul closed the gap in 3 long, wrong-jointed strides. Kalen waited until he could hear its breathing, if that wet rasp counted as breathing, then spun and cut in one motion. The blade caught it across the throat. The edge bit deep, opening the neck to the spine, and the creature's head flopped backward like a door on a broken hinge. It collapsed mid-stride, momentum carrying it forward in a tumbling sprawl that ended in the ditch. Kalen didn't watch it fall. He was already running again, sword still in hand, blood from the shoulder wound joining the blood from his temple in a hot trail down his chest. The clicking behind him hadn't slowed. 4 beats. 4 beats. Keep moving. The road curved, following the hill's natural rise, and for a moment Kalen lost sight of the crest. Just scrub and frozen dirt, and the endless slope that seemed to stretch higher the more he climbed. His boots slipped on a patch of ice hidden under frost. He caught himself with one hand, fingers scraping stone, and pushed back upright without losing more than a stride. The impact sent pain lancing up his wounded shoulder. He gritted his teeth and kept running. Another shape burst from the left side ditch. This one had learned from the first. It didn't lunge for him. It angled to cut him off, sprinting parallel to the road on long, backward-bending legs that ate ground faster than anything dead had a right to move. Kalen's mind raced. If it got ahead of him, if it forced him to stop, the tide behind would catch up, and if the tide caught up, he was done. He changed angle. Instead of following the road's curve, he cut straight up the slope, boots digging into the loose scree at the road's edge. The shattered soul adjusted, angling to intercept, but the direct line cost it distance. Kalen hit the creature at full speed. He dropped his shoulder and drove into it like he'd been taught to break a shield line, sword angled outward so the point led. The impact jarred through his whole body, but the shattered soul weighed less than a man, hollow-boned and wrong, and it went down under him. They hit the ground together in a tangle of limbs and steel. The creature's nails raked his ribs, tearing through his shirt and opening shallow cuts that burned like fire. Kalen drove his elbow into what passed for its face, felt bone crack, then punched his sword down into its chest. Once, twice. The third thrust went clean through and scraped stone beneath. The clicking stopped. Kalen rolled off the corpse, came to his feet, and ran. The main tide was close enough now that he could hear individual clicks, could distinguish the wet scrape of joints from the nail-on-stone sound of their hands finding purchase. He didn't look back. Looking back wouldn't change what was coming. The road crested. Kalen's heart lurched. Below him, the narrow valley that held his family's land spread out in shades of gray and white. The farmhouse sat squat and solid, smoke rising from the chimney in a thin line that said someone had just fed the fire. The barn stood to the left, doors closed against the cold. The fences marked clean lines through the snow, posts his father had set 10 years ago and maintained every spring. It looked peaceful. It looked like home. And moving across the upper field, flowing toward the fence line like spilled ink, were shattered souls. Not the dozen that had been chasing him, not even the scores he'd heard clicking at his heels. Hundreds. They moved in loose waves, coordinated without appearing to coordinate, each one following the same unstoppable tide toward the farmhouse. Some climbed the fence, others flowed around it, searching for gaps. A cluster had already reached the barn and were testing the doors with patient, methodical strikes. Kaylin's breath caught. The farmhouse door was still closed, shutters barred. That meant his family was inside, barricaded, following the drill his father had made them practice every season since Kaylin was old enough to hold a practice sword. But the drill had never accounted for this many. Movement at the porch caught his eye. The door opened a hand's width, lamplight spilling gold across the yard, and his father stepped out. Dane Arden carried the family blade. He wore no armor, just his work shirt and heavy boots, and his face was set in the expression Kaylin knew from hard winters and harder decisions. Behind him, barely visible in the doorway's shadow, Kaylin's mother and sisters huddled with whatever weapons they'd grabbed. His father had seen the tide coming, and he'd chosen to meet it outside, where the fight could be controlled, where the door could stay closed and the family could stay safe behind walls that might hold if no one let the shattered souls inside. Kaylin's legs were already moving before his mind finished processing. He sprinted down the slope, sword still in hand, boots sliding on loose stone. The clicking behind him surged, the tide that had chased him from the lowlands now joining the mass already assaulting his home. His father saw him. Recognition flashed across Dane's face, quickly buried under the same iron control that had seen them through droughts and storms, and the lean year when the grain had failed. Dane didn't shout, didn't wave. He just nodded once, stepped off the porch, and moved to take position where the fence met the gatepost. The seam. The weak point where two boards didn't quite meet and the wire sagged. And standing there, alone, waiting for the tide to reach him, was Kaylin's father. Kaylin ran faster. The distance between the hill road and the farmhouse had never seemed longer. His lungs were fire, his legs were lead. Blood still ran from his wounds, hot and slick, and his vision blurred at the edges. But he could see the fence line, could see the first shattered souls reaching it, could see his father's blade come up in a guard that had been drilled into Kaylin's bones since childhood. The first creature hit the fence. Dane's sword flashed, once, clean and economical. The shattered soul fell, and the one behind it climbed over the body without pause. Kaylin was 50 yards out when the fence began to buckle under the weight. 40 yards when the first section gave way with a splintering crack that echoed across the valley. 30 yards when the tide spilled into the yard and his father was forced to give ground, backing toward the porch in controlled steps while his blade moved in the rhythm that had been Ordathi doctrine for 3 generations. 20 yards. Kaylin's boots hit the packed dirt of the farmyard and he went straight for the seam, where his father held alone against a press that no single man should be able to hold. "Father!" The word tore from Kaylin's throat, raw and desperate. Dane's head turned a fraction. His eyes found Kaylin. And for just a moment, something like relief crossed his face before the iron control slammed back into place. "The seam!" Dane shouted. "Hold the seam!" Kaylin hit the fence line at full speed and drove his blade into the first shattered soul trying to claw through the gap. The creature folded. Another took its place. And behind them, filling the farmyard and the fields beyond, the tide kept coming. Chapter 3. Bar the door. Set the line. Quiet. Dane's palm cut through the air, and the room obeyed as if struck. A heartbeat later, the yard side door took an impact. Not frantic, but measured, the kind of shove that tested weight and resistance. Dust sifted from the lintel and drifted through lamplight. Rena froze, with the kettle half lifted. Sella's hand clamped over young Jory's mouth before the boy could make a sound. Maeve's humming died mid-note. Dane crossed the packed earth floor in 3 strides and set his shoulder to the door beside the crossbeam. The wood trembled under his weight and held. He didn't look back when he spoke, barely moving his lips. Drill. The word moved them. No scrambling, no questions. The hide curtain between the main room and the inner chamber swayed as Sella guided the children behind it. Jory's boots scuffed once. Sella lifted him without sound, thin arms hard with panic she refused to show. Rena went to the hearth rack on silent feet and slid the short axe free by the haft, careful not to rattle iron on iron. She eased the hooked pry bar from its peg, fingers sure despite the fear Dain could read in the tightness of her jaw. Her eyes flicked to him, waiting. He gave her 2 fingers, then a fist. Hold. No noise. Another impact came against the door. Then a pause, long enough to count breaths. In that pause, something scraped along the shutter seam to Dain's left, slow and searching, like a knife looking for the gap between boards. Dane felt the door bar flex under his shoulder. Whatever was out there wasn't throwing itself mindlessly at the walls. It was testing, learning. That was worse. He jerked his chin toward the shutters. Rena moved at once, not to the door, but to the heavy oak table. They'd drilled this 100 times. She caught the far edge, and Dane shoved with his hip, rotating the table until its long side ran parallel to the shutter wall. The legs scraped once, then settled. Rena wedged the bench against it and braced the bench's end into the hearthstone until the whole assembly locked solid. It left a narrow corridor along the wall, just wide enough for a man with steel to stand and cut without being flanked. Behind the hide curtain, Sella whispered something Dain couldn't catch. The fabric shivered as the children pressed deeper into the inner room. Mara's face appeared for half a breath at the edge, pale in lamplight. Dain lifted 2 fingers. Back. She swallowed and retreated, her hand sliding down the hide like she wanted to close a door that wasn't there. The yard side door took another pair of impacts, then one long push that made the wood groan. Dane leaned harder into the bar, boots digging into packed earth. The house smelled of boiled grain and smoke, and the sharp oil of steel freshly drawn from its rack. The scraping at the shutter stopped. Dain held still and listened with his whole body, counted his breaths, waited. A faint click came from outside. Nail on iron or bone on stone. Then the scraping returned, higher up, as if whatever was out there had changed its angle of attack. Rena's gaze darted to the shutter. She wanted to rush it, end the waiting. Dane shook his head, once. Patience in defense saved more lives than courage. The door shook again. The bar bowed and held. Dane kept his shoulder in place and let his eyes sweep the room without turning his head. The funnel was set. The inner room sealed behind the hide. Hearth tools gone from their pegs, now weapons in his wife's hands. The long knife had vanished behind the curtain with Sella. Good. A shadow shifted near the main door. Movement outside, quick and human-sized. Then the main door latch clicked. Not from outside, but from someone lifting the wooden thumb bar with familiar touch. A fist hammered once on the wood, fast and hard. "Father," Kaylin's voice, hoarse with cold and running. "Open, now." Dane's body answered before his mind finished processing. He slid off the yard side door and crossed the room in 2 strides, then caught himself a pace short. Behind him, another impact hit the yard door. The bar held, but the sound was different now, heavier, more of them pressing. Rena's eyes went wide. Behind the hide, someone sucked in a breath. Dane put his mouth close to the wood. "Kaelin." "No time," Kaelin said through the crack. "They're right behind me." Dane lifted the thumb bar and pulled the door inward a hand's breadth. Winter dusk poured in, bruised and dirty, and with it came a stench that tightened the back of his throat. Sour iron, spoiled meat, the smell of things that should be dead but kept moving anyway. Kaelin shoved through the gap. Tall and broad, hair damp with sweat gone cold. Grime streaked his cheeks. Blood ran down the left side of his face from a wound at his temple, fresh and still flowing. More blood soaked his shoulder, his ribs. His sword was drawn and dark with something that wasn't human blood. His chest heaved once. Then he forced it down, the way Dain had taught him. Control the breath, control the body. For a heartbeat, they only looked at each other. Father and son. The doorway framing Kaelin like a man returned from the edge of the world. Dane caught Kaelin's forearm. Not gentle, not cruel, just there. Solid. "You're here." Kaelin nodded. Words would have cost breath he didn't have. Dane pulled him inside and slammed the door. The thumb bar dropped into its bracket with a sound like a cell closing. He turned to the room, voice pitched low but carrying. "How many?" Kaelin's jaw worked. "Hundreds, maybe more. They're coming up from the lowlands in a wave. I killed 5 on the road." He paused, blood dripping from his jaw to the floor. "There are hundreds behind them." Rena made a sound in her throat, not quite a gasp. Dane held up one hand, palm flat, steady. "How long?" "Minutes. They were on my heels the whole climb." Dane's mind raced through the calculations. Hundreds meant the house couldn't hold, not if they pressed all at once. The doors would give, the shutters would splinter, and once they were inside, the narrow rooms would become a slaughterhouse where his family died in the dark. But outside there was space to move, space to cut, space to control the approach. And if he and Kaelin held the line at the fence, the door could stay barred. The family could stay safe behind walls that might hold if nothing living led the shattered souls inside. It was a slim chance. It was the only chance. "We hold them outside," Dain said. Rena's head snapped toward him. "Dane, no, you can't." "We hold outside," he repeated, harder. "The funnel only works if they don't get in. If they breach the door, everyone dies." He looked at Kaelin. "You and me, at the fence. We keep them from the porch." Kaelin nodded once. Blood still dripped from his temple, but his eyes were clear, focused. "Understood." Dane turned to Rena. "Bar the door behind us. Don't open it unless you hear my voice, and no clicking. If you hear clicking, you keep it shut no matter what you hear outside. You understand me?" Rena's face had gone pale, but she nodded. The axe was tight in her grip, knuckles white. "Sela," Dane called toward the hide. "You have the knife?" "Yes." Her voice came back steady. Braver than she felt, Dane knew. She was 16 and terrified, but she'd cut anything that came through this curtain before she let it touch the children. Dane went to the weapons rack and pulled down the family blade. The sword his father had carried, reforged twice, worn smooth by generations of hands. He'd trained with this steel since he was 10 years old. It fit his grip like it had been made for his hand alone. He buckled the belt and turned back to Kaelin. His son looked like he'd been dragged through a fight already. Blood matted his hair. His shirt hung in tatters where nails had raked him. But he stood upright, sword ready, and his eyes held the same expression Dane had seen in the training yard 1,000 times. Ready, waiting for the signal. Dane moved to the door, hand on the bar. He looked back once. Rena stood with the axe. Mara held the pry bar like a spear. Behind the hide, he could hear Sella's breathing and the quiet shuffle of children trying to be brave. His family. His responsibility. His blood. "If we fall," Dane said, voice low, "you hold this door until you can't hold it anymore. Then you run for the root cellar and bar it from inside. You hear me?" "We hear you," Rena said. Her voice didn't shake. Dane nodded, looked at Kaylin. "Ready?" "Ready." Dane lifted the bar. The door swung inward and winter cold poured in, carrying with it the sound that made his blood run ice cold. Clicking. Dozens of sources, maybe hundreds. A chorus of bone on stone and nail on wood, rising from the fields beyond the fence like a swarm finding its voice. And underneath it, the wet scrape of joints that bent wrong. Dane stepped onto the porch. Kaylin followed. Behind them, the door slammed shut, and the bar dropped home. They were locked out with the tide. The farmyard spread before them in shades of gray and white. The fence line was already sagging under weight, pale bodies climbing over each other to reach the top rail. More flowed around the corners, searching for gaps. A cluster pressed against the barn, testing the doors with methodical strikes. And coming across the upper field, in a wave that seemed to have no end, hundreds more. Dane's grip tightened on his sword. The odds were impossible. The fight was unwinnable. But the fight was also inevitable, and Ordathi doctrine was clear. When death comes, you meet it on your feet with steel in your hand. He looked at his son. Kaylin was already moving down the porch steps, heading for the fence line where the gate met the post. The seam. The weak point where two boards didn't quite meet and the wire sagged like a tired shoulder. The place that would break first. Dane followed. They reached the seam together, and without a word spoken, they took their positions. Kaylin on the left, guarding the gate, Dane on the right, covering the gap. The first shattered soul hit the fence. "Hold the seam!" Dane shouted. Kaylin's blade flashed. The creature fell. Another took its place. And the tide kept coming. Dane's sword moved in the rhythm his father had taught him, the rhythm he'd taught Kaylin, the rhythm that was Ordathi to the bone. 2 beats in, 1 beat out. Cut, reset, cut. No wasted motion, no panic. Just steel and skill and the knowledge that every second they held was another second the door stayed closed. Another second his family stayed alive. The fence rail groaned, wood splintered, nails screeched as they pulled from posts that had been set 10 years ago and were never meant to hold against this. Beside him, Kaylin fought with the same brutal efficiency. His blade rose and fell, opened throats and severed limbs, turned the seam into a killing ground that the shattered souls had to cross to reach the house. Bodies piled. The ground turned slick with dark blood. And still, the tide kept coming. A section of fence to the left gave way with a crack like breaking bone. Shattered souls poured through the gap, and suddenly Dane was cutting in 3 directions at once, blade moving faster than thought, trying to hold a line that was collapsing. "Left side!" Kaylin shouted. Dane pivoted, drove his sword through a pale throat, yanked free, and cut again. His shoulders burned, his breath came hard. He was 53 years old, and he'd spent the last 20 years working a farm, not fighting wars. But he'd been Ordathi once, trained since childhood, and the training didn't forget, even when the body started to slow. He cut, reset, cut. The tide surged. And somewhere in the chaos of blood and clicking and splintering wood, Dane realized they weren't going to hold. Not forever. But they didn't need forever. They just needed long enough. Breaking, both knowing they can't win but fighting anyway. The reader sees the choice to fight outside was the right call and the only call, even if it's a death sentence.
Chapter 4. The 100-foot horizon. Seam! Kale! Hold the seam!
Kalen's boots skidded in churned snow as the first wave hit the fence hard enough to make the wire sing. He planted his left foot where the gate met the post, where two boards didn't quite meet and the chain loop sagged, and drove his blade down into the first pale hand that found the gap. The hand came away at the wrist. Black hooked nails flashed once as the severed piece spasmed in the snow. The press behind didn't slow. More climbed, wrong-jointed knees folding backward and snapping straight as they hauled narrow bodies over the rails. Others shoved from behind, using the fallen as rungs. The fence, meant to keep goats honest and children safe, bowed inward under living weight that didn't breathe. Kalen kept his shoulders square to the seam and his sword tight to his body. No room for wide arcs. The yard had shrunk to a corridor between fence and porch, and every step toward the door gave the shattered souls that much more space to work with. A creature dropped into the yard on its hands, joints cracking as it took the fall, and surged low toward his shins. Kalen met it with a downward cut that bit through neck and collarbone. It folded and kept crawling, head dangling by a strip of torn cloth. He stomped its spine into frozen mud and drove steel through the base of its skull. It went slack, still as wet rope. To his right, closer to the porch steps, his father held the line like a post driven deep. Each time Dain's sword moved, it did so on a count, 2 beats in, 1 beat out, turning chaos into something a body could obey. His breath rasped, audible even over the impacts. Now, again, left side don't slip, again. Kalen heard the cadence and let it pace him. Step, set, cut, step, set, cut. The slick beneath his boots wasn't snow anymore, but snow mixed with frozen mud and dark blood that smelled like iron left too long in wet stone. Each time he shifted weight, the ground tried to take him. A body slammed the gate chain. The iron rattled. For a heartbeat, nails clicked at the links, testing, listening. Then the figure withdrew, as if to report what it had learned. Kalen hated that pause more than the rush. He took the next climber in the throat anyway, opening it clean, and watched thin, dark blood steam faintly before it went black in the slush. They came in waves, not a mindless flood, but surges that hit, recoiled, and hit again, as if the mass behind them was breathing. The fence rail disappeared under pale limbs, the air filled with the dry sound of wood complaining. A shattered soul tried to wedge itself into the seam sideways, shoulders rolling like it had no bones where bones should be. Kalen pinned it with the flat of his blade, felt ribs bend under pressure, then thrust through its sternum. The point punched out its back with a soft, wrong give. He yanked free. Sour blood dotted his knuckles. "Don't chase," Dain snapped without looking. "You kill what's there, nothing else." "I'm on it," Kalen said, though it came out like breath, not answer. For seconds at a time, holding the seam worked. The pressure on the porch eased enough that Dain could reset his feet on the boards without being dragged backward. Then the fence would shudder again, and the seam would become a mouth trying to swallow them. A pair dropped together, one landing half on the other. The top one used the lower body as a ramp to spring. Kalen caught it mid-lunge with a cut that took its arm at the elbow. The severed limbs slapped the snow and kept twitching, fingers grasping at nothing. The thing didn't look at the loss. It only kept coming, shoulder dipping to drive black nails into his thigh. Kalen twisted his hips, let the attack slide past his leg by inches, and punished the opening with a thrust into the side of its neck. Its head snapped back, joints clicking like dice in a cup, and it folded as if someone had cut its strings.
Something raked his shin.
Pain flared, sharp as a ripped nail, and warmth spilled into his boot. He didn't look down. Looking down meant dying. He shifted his stance to keep weight off the injured leg and cut the thing that had reached him. A quick downward chop split its face from crown to jaw.
It fell,
And 2 more took its place.
the yard narrowed.
Bodies and broken fence boards made ridges, little walls that forced his feet into the same few blood-slicked paths.
Dane's voice cut through again. "Seam, stay in it. Stay."
The fence corner to the left gave a groan, lower and deeper than the rest. Kalen's eyes flicked toward the far end of the yard where the well sat under a crusted rim of snow and old rope. Shadows moved there, not joining the climb, but peeling away from the press, as if on command.
"They're peeling off!"
Kalen shouted. Diane's head snapped toward the well for a fraction of a heartbeat. Not yet. Let them show you what they're doing. The clicking shifted, traveling over snow and boards, a sound like teeth on bone. A loosened board near the well flexed under slow, patient pressure, the way a man tests a latch with a knife. Kalen held the seam another 3 breaths, cutting down 2 more climbers, and a third that tried to squeeze through on its back, ribs audibly snapping as it forced itself into a space too narrow for anything with bones.
Then Dane barked. "Now! Go!"
Kalen pivoted hard, boots scraping for purchase. The turn pulled his wounded shin and white pain flashed up his leg, but he kept the blade low and close, Ordathi form tight enough to fit between fence and well stones. He reached the secondary breach as the board popped loose with a wet crack. A pale hand slid through first, fingers splaying to feel the air. Kalen severed it at the wrist. The arm withdrew, then forced itself back through, elbow folding wrong to fit. He stepped in, heel to toe, and drove the point into the forearm, pinning it to the board. The creature on the other side leaned its weight, trying to tear the gap wider, using its own body as leverage. Kalen slid his blade along the pinned arm up to the elbow and chopped down. The joint parted. The board snapped fully free, and a shattered sole spilled into the yard, landing on its side and twisting to rise. He hamstrung it against the well stones. The cut was clean and deep. The leg went slack. It still tried to crawl. He finished it with a thrust through the eye socket. The point grated against the back of the skull. 2 more followed, using the first body as a bridge. Kalen met them one at a time, always cutting the limb that reached first, always keeping his weight under him. One lunged and he redirected with the spine of his blade, letting it overextend, then opened its throat with a short draw cut that painted the well rim dark. Behind him, the main mass kept compressing, pushing the whole fight toward the porch steps. Dane's sword flashed, constant and disciplined, but even he was giving ground by inches, forced to step back onto the boards and then off again as bodies piled. Kalen killed the last creature at the well breach and turned back toward the seam. What he saw made his chest tighten. The fence wasn't bowing anymore. It was breaking. The center section, where the most weight had been pressing, gave way with a crack like a tree coming down. Rails split, posts toppled, wire snapped and whipped back, cutting pale flesh that didn't bleed the way living flesh should. And through the gap poured shattered souls, in a flood that turned the yard from a controlled fight into a brawl. Dane saw it too. His stance shifted, blade coming up higher, guard tighter. No more controlled spacing, no more disciplined cuts, just survival. "Back to the porch," he shouted. "Now." Kalen sprinted across the yard, boots slipping in blood and mud. A shattered soul lunged from his blind side, and he barely got his blade up in time. The parry was ugly, more luck than skill, and the impact jarred through his already burning shoulders. He shoved the creature off and kept moving. Dane had already backed onto the porch steps, giving himself the high ground. His sword moved in a blur, cutting down anything that tried to climb. But there were too many now, pressing from 3 sides, and the steps only gave him so much room to work. Kaelin hit the porch at a dead run and took position on his father's left. "Together," Dane said. Not shouted, just stated, a fact. "Together," Kaelin confirmed. They held the steps. Shattered souls came at them in a press that had no individual faces anymore, just a mass of pale limbs and black nails and that endless clicking that made Kaelin's teeth ache. He cut and cut and cut until his arms burned and his blade felt like it weighed twice what it should. The wood beneath his boots was slick with blood. His own, from the wounds at temple and shoulder and shin, the dark blood of the creatures. It all mixed together into a soup that made every step treacherous. His father fought beside him with the same economy he'd shown at the fence, but Kaelin could hear his breathing now, ragged, labored. 53 years old and holding a line that would have broken men half his age. A shattered soul got past Kaelin's guard and raked nails across his ribs. He felt skin part, felt the hot rush of blood, but he was already turning into the attack and driving his blade through the creature's chest. It folded. Another took its place. Always another. The world had narrowed to the space at the top of the porch steps. 10 feet of blood-soaked wood. His father on his right, the door at his back, barred from inside. His family's last defense if this line broke. It couldn't break. He wouldn't let it break. But his arms were lead. His legs shook. Blood loss made his vision swim at the edges, and each breath tasted like copper and rot. To his right, Dain grunted. Not a shout, not a word, just a sound of impact and pain. Kaelin's head snapped toward him. His father staggered back half a step. A shattered soul had gotten under his guard, driven its nails into his side where the ribs met the gut. Dane's blade came down and took the creature's head off, but the damage was done. Blood spread across his shirt in a dark stain that was too large, too fast. "Father." "Hold," Dane said through gritted teeth. He stayed upright through sheer will, blade rising again to meet the next attack. But his stance was wrong now, favoring the wounded side, moving slower. Kaelin stepped in front of him, taking the center position, trying to cover the gap. A shattered soul lunged and he cut it down. 2 more came and he killed them both, but one got past and raked Dane's shoulder. His father's sword flashed, killing it, but he staggered again. "Get inside," Kaelin said. "I'll hold them." "No." Dane's voice was iron. "We hold together, or we don't hold at all." A fresh wave hit the steps. Kaelin met it with everything he had left, blade moving on pure training because thought had become too slow. Cut, parry, thrust. Bodies fell and more climbed over them. His father fought beside him, wounded and bleeding but still standing, still cutting, still Ordathi to the core. And then the next impact came. Kaelin didn't see where it came from. He was cutting low, taking a creature at the knees, when he heard his father make that sound again. Softer this time, almost surprised. He looked up. Dane's sword was still in his hand, but his knees were buckling. A shattered soul had driven its whole arm through his gut, nails punching out his back in a spray of blood that looked black in the fading light. Dane's blade rose one more time, fell, took the creature's head. Then he collapsed. He went down hard, blade clattering from his grip, and didn't rise. "Father." Kaelin's voice broke on the word. He stepped over his father's body, straddling him, sword coming up in a guard that covered them both. Shattered souls pressed from every side, clicking and reaching, and Kalen cut them down with a fury that burned through his exhaustion. He couldn't think, couldn't plan, could only kill everything that tried to reach the man on the ground behind him. The man who wasn't moving. The man who might already be dead. And still, the shattered souls kept coming. Chapter 5. When the porch goes quiet. Kalen's arms were burning. Not the good burn from hard training. This was deeper. The kind that said muscle was tearing, tendons fraying, and the body was running on something borrowed that would have to be paid back, with interest. He didn't care. His father lay behind him on the porch boards, unmoving, and Kalen stood over him like a wall made of failing flesh and failing steel. The shattered souls pressed from 3 sides: the steps, the porch rail, the gap where the fence had been. They came in 1s and 2s now instead of waves, but that was worse somehow. Each one had to be killed individually, and killing took strength Kalen didn't have anymore. His blade rose, fell, rose again. A creature lunged for his throat. He parried, barely, and countered with a thrust that caught it under the jaw. The point scraped teeth and punched through the roof of its mouth into whatever passed for a brain. It went slack, sliding off his steel, and he had to yank hard to free the blade before the next one came. Blood ran into his eyes, his own from the temple wound that had never stopped bleeding. He blinked it away, vision blurring red, and cut down the next attacker. Behind him, his father's breathing had stopped. Or maybe Kalen just couldn't hear it anymore over his own ragged gasps and the endless clicking and the wet sound of his blade opening dead flesh. He'd tried to check, tried to kneel, feel for a pulse, see if Dane's chest still rose. But the moment he'd dropped his guard, 3 shattered souls had surged up the steps, and he'd barely gotten his sword up in time. So he stood, and he fought. And he didn't let himself think about what it meant that his father hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, hadn't made a sound in the last 50 heartbeats. The world had narrowed to the space he could defend, 5 feet in any direction. The door at his back, still barred, his father's body beneath him, and the shrinking circle of blood-soaked wood where he could still plant his boots without slipping. A shattered soul came from his left, low and fast. He cut it across the eyes, and it recoiled, clicking frantically, blind. He finished it with a downward chop that split its skull. 2 more took its place. His sword arm shook. The blade felt like an anvil, and each time he lifted it, the weight got heavier. His shoulders screamed. His hands were numb, except where blisters had formed and burst and formed again. But he kept lifting the blade, because stopping meant dying. And dying meant the shattered souls would step over him and his father both, would tear through the barred door like it was kindling, and would kill everyone inside. His mother, his sisters, the children. So he didn't stop. A nail raked his thigh, opening a line of fire from hip to knee. He twisted away from the follow-up, drove his blade through the creature's neck, and kicked the body off the porch. It tumbled down the steps and landed in the yard, where dozens of others had fallen. The pile was high enough now that the newer arrivals had to climb over corpses to reach him. Good. Let them climb. Every second they spent climbing was another second he stayed alive. His left leg buckled. Not from a wound, just exhaustion. The muscles gave out mid-step and he went down on one knee, barely catching himself with his free hand against the porch rail. A shattered soul lunged. Kalen got his blade up on pure instinct, caught the creature across the chest, but the angle was wrong and the cut wasn't deep enough. It kept coming, nails reaching for his face. He threw himself backward, rolled over his father's legs, came up on the other side with his sword between him and the thing that was already climbing over Dane's body to get to him. Kalen screamed. Not words, just rage and grief, and a sound that came from a place deeper than thought. He drove his blade up through the creature's gut, lifted it off his father's body with strength that shouldn't have been there, and flung it over the porch rail. It hit the yard with a wet crunch and didn't rise. Kalen stood over his father again, chest heaving, vision swimming. More came. He killed them. His technique was gone. No more Orthathi form, no more disciplined cuts, just hacking and stabbing and doing whatever it took to keep steel between the shattered souls and the man on the ground. The man who still wasn't moving. The man whose blood had pooled beneath him in a dark mirror that reflected the gray sky. Kalen's mind was fragmenting. Part of him was still fighting, still cutting, still moving through forms his body remembered even when his mind had stopped working. But another part had gone somewhere else. Somewhere cold and distant where the only thought that remained was a single, terrible certainty. His father was dead. Dain Arden, who had taught him to hold a sword before he could write his name, who had drilled him in the yard every morning until precision became reflex, who had stood beside him tonight and fought with the kind of courage that stories were built on. Dead. And Kalen was next. He could feel it, the way his arms barely lifted anymore, the way his legs shook with each step, the way his vision had narrowed to a tunnel and everything outside that tunnel was just gray fog. He was running out. A shattered soul got past his guard and raked his ribs. He barely felt it, just turned and cut the thing down and kept moving, kept fighting, kept standing because standing was the only thing left. The door behind him stayed closed. His family was in there. He could hear them through the wood, faint and distant. His mother's voice, tight with fear, Sella crying, the younger children making sounds that might have been prayers or might have been nothing at all. They were following his father's last command. Don't open the door, no matter what you hear. Even if what they heard was Kalen dying. His hand found his belt. Not deliberately, just a reflex, fingers searching for something, anything that might help. And there, tucked against his hip where he'd carried it for the last year, was the small leather pouch his father had given him. Don't use this, Dain had said when he'd handed it over. Don't even think about using it. But if you're ever in a place where death is certain and taking others with you, this might buy you a few more breaths. The forbidden token. Kalen's fingers closed around the pouch. He'd never believed it would work. Orthathi doctrine was clear. Magic was real, but using it without sanction was transgression. The kind that got men executed. The kind that destroyed families and ended bloodlines. But his father was dead. His family was about to die. And Kalen was alone on a porch with 100 corpses at his feet, and 100 more still coming. Death was already certain. A shattered soul lunged, and he cut it down without thinking, body moving on autopilot while his mind raced. The token was small, wrapped in oiled cloth, tied with a cord he'd never untied. He didn't know what it looked like, didn't know the words that were supposed to go with it. His father had never told him, and Kalen had never asked, because asking meant thinking about the kind of desperation that would make a man consider using forbidden magic. He was thinking about it now. His blade was heavy, his arms were failing. Blood loss made everything feel distant and cold. And behind him, his father's body was getting colder too. Kalen killed another shattered soul, then another. His movements were automatic now, no thought behind them, just trained reflex fighting while his conscious mind made a choice that couldn't be unmade. His fingers pulled the token free. The cord came loose with a tug. The oiled cloth fell away. In his palm sat a small carved stone, no bigger than his thumb, etched with symbols that hurt to look at. Not because they were complex, because they were simple, fundamental, the kind of marks that looked like they'd been cut into the world before language existed. He didn't know what they meant. He didn't know if this would work. But he knew that if he didn't try, everyone he loved would die in the next few minutes. Kalen closed his fist around the stone and spoke the only words he could think of. Please, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this preview and would like to read or listen to the full book, you can find the ebook and full audiobook details below.